Apparently, okay, tell us some more about that. Time frames changing and things overlooked, right? Okay. And why do you think that happened? Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Yep, because we're talking about two businesses, right, that are trying to survive in a fledgling market. Other ideas? Yes. Because that's one of the people that is not where they need to be at the designated turnaround time, right? Okay. Because he had, as a guide, had a close relationship with the client, right? Which happens, right? We form close relationships with the people that we work with. Amazing how, right? Who was that guy? Let's get clear. Let Doug Hansen, right? And what's Doug's background? Okay, exactly. He's a postal worker in Seattle, so it's amazing how, right, back-to-back years, somebody that, right, is a postal carrier, vital position, vital work, but they sure don't make very much money. So here's a guy who's able to come up with 60 to 70 grand 2 years in a row to be able to make this climb, right? Because he did make it the year before. Paul feels sorry for him, and I think cuts him some sort of a deal financially to come back the next year. But then that undoubtedly ties into why he feels uncomfortable saying it's too late, right? You got to turn around, which he didn't do. All right, other thoughts, other things that jump out. Definitely. That's a tough one, right? Right? Who's the overall leader of Mountain Madness? Fisher, right? So he's the boss, right? From a leadership perspective, what do we generally recognize about the overall person in charge? Should be the person with the biggest picture view, right? The person who's able to step back and kind of be able to be involved with as many different things as possible, or at least know what's going on, and leave the operational sorts of things to who? Folks lower down on the chain, who would be the Sherpas. So the most logical thing in hindsight, right, would be to, I need to stay up here and keep a big picture view. I can delegate this to a Sherpa who simply needs to take this guy down and get him safe. But yeah, exactly. That whole personal relationship comes into play, and he's like, I'll do it myself. Again, for somebody who is, with what he's got going on medically, that was all cumulative because Fisher was way less than 100% with regard to his own personal health. So that whacked him even more, going all those unnecessary up and down trips. Yep. You know what they had? What did they have for radios? Yeah, they had those things you buy at Radio Shack for like 12 bucks, and every kid in the freaking planet's on the same channel that you're on, right? At a ski hill or whatever it is. That's what they had, right? You spend 60, $70,000, right? Personally, individually, and that's what you're handed, and not even everybody was handed one of those things. So we all know how vital communication is in a high-risk environment, and yet not everybody even has a little $5 radio that they can contact somebody else if there's an issue. Other thoughts? Yeah. So were they a team? They call themselves a climbing team? Probably not. So that's really the foundation of where this whole argument between these two guys stems from, right? Is we have a difference in philosophies. So what's Krakauer's climbing philosophy? Okay. So let me hone my question down a little bit more. With regard to guiding, specifically, what's the difference in philosophy? Yes. Yep. But then between these two guys, what's the difference? Because that's where the crux of the whole thing lies. Right? Krakauer's belief is that in the traditional guide model, the guide should be pretty much with the client most of the time. And Buchreev's philosophy was what? Exactly. If you're not ready to be there, you shouldn't be there. And he was hired to do what, in his opinion? He was hired as technical expertise, right? He told Fisher, right, I'm not going to handhold your clients for you. That's not what I do. That's not my role as I see it. I'll fix ropes. I'll make sure that the logistics are in place. I'll deal with the Sherpas. I'll handle all the operational kinds of things that we need to support this client, but I'm not the guy who's going to babysit all these clients. And Fisher was like, okay, that's fine with me. And yet we have a difference in opinion then into how a guide is supposed to be viewed, right? Very much like, and that's where the relevance to this class comes into play, if you haven't connected the dots already, which is, as HHP professionals, whatever you're going to do, you are a guide. As an athletic trainer, as a physical therapist, as somebody in the medical community, as a personal trainer, as a health enhancement teacher, as a community health specialist, whatever it is, you are a guide to clients. And those clients look up to you, they trust you, they rely on your skill sets and your expertise to keep them safe and to get them better at whatever it is that they're trying to do, or in this case, get them to the top of the mountain. So that's the analogy, is that we share a lot of similarities with these folks, Sherpa or non-Sherpa, who are leading and guiding people to the top of the mountain. So it's filled with all sorts of legal and ethical issues, right? On the legal side, what do we see? Well, let's kind of wade through here and begin our discussion a little bit. Well, if we back up, let's look at what we've talked about over the course of the class. We talked about writing styles early on, this general policy or principle of following the money, legal system, negligence, liability, moral, ethical development, waivers, emergency care, performance-enhancing stuff, the risk piece of identification and management, and then lying and cheating, right? Every single one of those things in some way or another is in those two books. Some of them much more so than others, but every one of those is in there in some way. All right, so when Krakauer writes his book, he introduces it with this whole thing that he calls the dramatis personae, which is the faces in the tragedy, right? Basically, that's how it translates. So it's very much a theatrical term. That's its origins, but then that theatrical term got pushed over into the legal world, and when you look at a legal case, and that legal case is describing in written form all the people that were involved in this case, Guess what? That's what they call it. They call it the dramatis personae. Here's all the people that were involved in this legal case. So I think Krakauer does that intentionally, right? He's saying this is a tragedy. He writes this as if it is a tragedy, but he's also writing this as if it is his legal interpretation of what happened. Here's my side of the story in case anybody starts getting hinky about it and they start trying to call me out. This is my view of what happened. Right, was this the original intent? What was Krakauer's original intent? Just so we're clear on that. Why was he there? Okay, write an article for who? Outside on what? Commercialization of the mountain. The bottom line is follow the money, as we've talked about. We've got all this money coming into the mountain, and let's figure out where it's going and what's happening with it. And then this article for outside eventually morphed into this. But that wasn't his original intent, right? He was just a paid gun to write a story for outside. That was his decision then to write the book. Correct. Because his background was what as a climber? Unbelievable ice climber, technical climber, altitude climber, no. And he admits that, right? He said, I don't know how I'm going to respond. I have no experience at altitude. If I have to be on oxygen, I don't know if my body's going to be able to respond to that. That's the great irony, right? The highest mountain in the world, the one that everybody looks to is like, wow, you climbed Everest. It really requires very little technical skill as a climber. If you've got the genetic roll of the dice, right, and are able to function at altitude, and you can suffer a lot, you can climb Everest. That's the amazing thing. That's why people step up year after year to pay 50, 60, 70 grand, because some of them can do it with really very little or no technical expertise with climbing. And that's what the true climbing community, right, really has a burr in their saddle about, is that all these people claim to be climbers, and yet they really couldn't climb their way out of a box if they had to. All right? So multiple meanings, we've covered that. In this case, again, Krakauer is saying, here's a tragedy that I'm going to tell you about, but I'm also giving you my legal interpretation. So we get into the introduction, and Krakauer says, several authors and editors I respect counseled me not to write the book as quickly as I did. They urged me to wait 2 or 3 years and put some distance between me and the expedition in order to gain some crucial perspective. Obviously, he didn't follow that advice. But what is this that we've talked about? There you go. Love is blind, right? He had no objectivity because he was so immersed in it emotionally still. I got to get this out. I got to write this book. Even though people tell me to wait, to chill, and let things come into perspective, I got to get it out now. Yeah. Absolutely. But what happened by writing it so quickly? He got things wrong, right? He got things inaccurate. It's not just inaccurate, flat out, completely wrong with regards to where certain people even were at given times. Guys that died, which caused their families a lot of grief, right? Because he is telling one story when in actuality the truth is something different. But that happens, right? People, we just miss things. That we're inaccurate at times. But again, if he had allowed this time to transpire, some of those things, if not all of them, would have probably been cleaned up as he was able to build his situational awareness by talking with a lot of other people to find out what they saw so that he could begin to put the pieces together. All right, so follow the money. How do we follow the money? Where's the money going? If that's one of our analysis tools, how's money going to help us understand what's going on Everest? Go ahead, Sarah. Yes, definitely. But think about that, 1996, right? And what's she doing? What's Sandy Hill Pittman doing? She's got satellite uplinks. She's got sat phones. She's running a blog, right? She's doing stuff on the web. That was pretty nascent in 1996, right? There wasn't a whole lot of that going on. So that's pretty cutting edge that they've got her along to basically have the world be able to, in real time, more or less track the progress of this expedition. Did it have some impacts? Undoubtedly, because the leaders especially, I think, felt pressure to make sure that whether it was her or whether it was Krakauer, that those folks got to the top so that what? If they get to the top, I can get to the top. I'm going to go do that too. So a lot of pressure to get those folks up the mountain. All right, where else do we see the money? Yep. Yes. Not many people that can spend 50, 60, 70 grand to go on a expedition, right? Or to take 2 months off from work in order to even make that happen, right? That is a pretty select clientele. And you saw that. Beck Weathers, right? A lot of surgeons, a lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers, a lot of people that are funded in some way that were able to pull that off. So it's not the average Joe and Josephine for the most part. Right? So again, yeah, hopefully you're seeing that, and then the fallout of all this money on the mountain itself is what? Yeah, how so? Right, for these climbing permits and fees, that's where your 50, 60, 70 grand is going. A lot of it is going simply to, here's your license, here's your fee to be able to climb. And we'll get to that towards the end here, because there's a pretty big discrepancy in that as far as what are you paying and what are you getting. But then as far as the general state of the mountain, what do we know? It's just totally trashed, right? People just leave their crap there, bodies all over the place, garbage, tanks, human waste. I mean, it is not a pleasant place because we don't seem to have the foresight to be able to treat it with the respect that, especially like the Sherpas would ask for, because that's the Sugar Matha or whatever it is, right? That's the temple, that's their church. So it's amazing that their perspective on it. All right, so from a risk standpoint, how does that come into play? How are we identifying risk and how are they managing it? Obviously, we're talking about a lot of inherent risk, right? In an activity where you could do a lot of things, but you're never going to get the inherent risk out of it. So, if we realize or recognize there's a lot of inherent risk in it, how are we trying to manage that? What are they trying to do to manage it? Tanks? Absolutely. Guides? Yep. Sherpas, so rely on expertise, yeah. Yep, long period of time up and down, so some ex-phys kind of stuff to what's the best way to prepare the body to do it at a certain time of the year, right, which is now. April, May is really the very small climbing window. Gear, obviously. What else? Yeah, there you go. Some policy things as far as up and down, and all in an attempt to manage risk. And again, as we read the books and see, there's a lot of instances where they just failed to manage the risk very well. They might have even identified it in the first place, and yet then they didn't choose to manage it, or they ignored managing it. All right, negligence. Did you see negligence anywhere? Was anybody in either of those books negligent? Okay, Riley, you're saying yes. Who's negligent? Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Yep. Potentially there. Who else? Yep. Woodall's Woodall's group. All right. Who else? Yep. How about Hall? Let's look at Hall. Is he negligent? Duty, act, proximate cause, damage or harm, right? He's automatically got a duty. He's a guide to these people. Act. Okay? Is there something that he did or didn't do that was the reason or the proximate cause why those people got killed? You can make a pretty good case for it, right? You can make a pretty good case for at least ordinary negligence. That what he did or didn't do led to, specifically, let's look at Hansen, got Hansen killed. Was he negligent? Probably. Right? Probably ordinarily negligent. Why? Was he grossly negligent? Heightened degree? Maybe. But what did he choose to do? Right? He sat there and died with his client when he could have hiked himself down. That guy'd been to the top of the mountain several times before. He obviously had the stamina and the ability to be able to do that, and yet he sat there by the side of Hansen while Hansen died, right? With a sat phone, calling his wife as he's shortly, right? How terrible would that be, right? Hi, honey, I'm almost dead. Good to hear from you. Have a nice life. Talk to you somewhere. You know, how awkward is that conversation? As everybody at base camp is listening in on it, right? Pretty creepy, right? But probably negligent. Boukreev may be negligent as far as what he did or didn't do. All sorts of people potentially negligent, but again, is what they did the proximate cause or the reason why people got hurt, or is it just simply what? Inherent risk just snuck up and bit them in the rear end, right? There's a good case. You could defend it either way. Totally. Yeah, weather windows, all sorts of just out of our hands sorts of stuff. Yep. And then we've got two guys, right? Brashears and Woodall. If we're going to look at moral and ethical development specifically and pick out a couple guys, what did Brashears do? What's Brashears doing? Why is he there? Yes, he's filming the IMAX Everest movie. Crazy, right? You know what IMAX does, right? These huge rolls of film, because that's what IMAX is. There's so many frames in it. That's why you have the clarity, and these huge cameras and all this gear that they've got people then carrying up and down the mountain trying to get all this video. And yet, with all that being said, this goes down, and what does Brashears do? He says, I'm going to shut down this multi-million-dollar funded project that I have to film this Everest IMAX movie, and I'm going to give them whatever they need in order to try and facilitate this rescue, if there's anybody worth rescuing or still able to be rescued. And contrasted with Woodall, what's Woodall's reaction? Screw those folks, man, I'm going up, and I'm not telling anybody else when I'm going up because I don't want them to know when I'm going up. So you have, right, two just completely different levels of ethical functioning or reasoning behind what they did. One guy just said, I'll do the right thing, absolutely, without thinking about it, and another guy was like, sucks to be those people, but I'm getting mine. So pretty amazing, just the difference on the mountain. Performance enhancing substances, did we see that anywhere? Everywhere? Yeah. And magnified in subsequent years. If you read anything about Everest nowadays, base camp sounds like a hell of a good time. I mean, just pop around different tents and just have a good, right? That's like a trekking destination for a lot of people, which is just get yourself to base camp and then it's just party central from that point. Lots of fun for some people, causes a lot of problems for those folks that are there to climb, but that's kind of what it has devolved into at this point. But we already see it by the time 1996 when these books are written, and then magnified obviously with Dex issue and all sorts of the other performance enhancing things that people are taking either recreationally or simply to deal with the inflammation and all the different things that are happening in the body, as your body is telling you, don't do this, and you're taking all sorts of things to be able to try and do that. So that's all performance enhancing, so we see that going on. Lying and cheating, give me 2 examples. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Others. One more. Yeah. That sounds good when you're signing up, right? If I don't make it the first time, he'll keep us around and we'll go another date. Not the plan in his head, right? So good. Yeah. All sorts of lying and cheating examples. And then if we're going to look at these and compare and contrast them, how are they alike? Other than just the face value, low-hanging fruit of climbing expeditions on Everest in 1996, right? How do they compare and contrast at a much deeper level? Okay, say that again. All right. Yeah, because right, they had this back and forth going on. If you got depending on which edition of this you got, later editions, each subsequent edition would have this back and forth between these two guys. One would write a letter calling out the other guy, and the other guy would say, yeah, BS to that. How about what you did? And this would go back and forth until what happened. Bucreev's dead, right? Bucreev dies in an avalanche on Annapurna, so there goes that debate. They can't debate anymore with him dead. But so, Riley, you're saying from a comparison or a contrasting standpoint, that this has got more subjectivity and he's just drilling down to the facts? Okay. Other thoughts? Yeah.